My name is Jack Espey. I first got involved in MSIA in 1979. I was working for an architectural firm in San Antonio, Texas. We met Kay and Rankin Griesinger, and they were having home seminars at their house, invited us over. The main thing I remember, started the little tape, and I would just zonk out. But I'd hear JR sniffling and sniffling. I wanted to buy him some Kleenex so badly. And I'd be gone, I'd hear, please turn the tape over. I'd hear a few words, I'd hear some more sniffling, I'd be gone again. Then I'd hear Beirish Bashan. And for several months I did this. I kept wondering about this guy. Who was he, what was he? Because I hadn't met him physically. And then they did the spring travels. And they came down to San Antonio the spring of 1980. And JR and the staff was there, and we went to the Unity Church. And I don't remember what JR talked about at that time. But we went back to Kay Rankin's house afterwards. We were sitting around the kitchen table. Now, I was raised in this small Baptist church in Texas. And when the preacher came, there were certain things you talked about, there's things you didn't talk about, especially at the kitchen table. So I'm sitting down there being prim and proper, with this spiritual leader, and JR talks about hemorrhoids. And I'm kind of blown away, because where I grew up, you would never talk about hemorrhoids to a Baptist preacher at the kitchen table. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay, I'm gonna get ready for this. The entire time I knew JR, he broke some crystals for me, and that was just one of many. And in 1983, I designed a condominium project for the Gulf Coast of Texas. And at that time, MSIA and JR was talking about designing and building a living center where people could come to seminars, stay, for the seminars, they could even live there if they choose to do so. Well, this condo project that I designed for the Gulf Coast had different size units in it, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, a big ballroom, offices. And when they came down in the spring of spring of 85, I was talking to Edgar. I said, Edgar, this design I did for these condos would be a really good basis for a living center, because you have a place for meetings, you have a place for seminars, people could stay over for a weekend, they could live there. I think this thing would be really handy. So he said, well, bring the drawings out to conference to show to JR. We'd talk about it. And so that was in conference in 1985. Now we'll slide back a little bit, because back then things were done a little differently than they are now. And in 82, I decided I wanted to be ordained, and I wasn't even fully certain what a MSIA minister was. And so this was the very first insight training that we had in Texas. It was in San Antonio, and JR and the staff was there that spring. I wrote a hand note to JR and said, JR, I'd like to be ordained. And I was sitting on the doors outside, this room where they have the insight, and he comes out and said, oh, well, you sent me a note of some kind or something? Yeah, I want to be this ordained. I want to be one of these ministers. And he kind of looked at me and said, Edgar, okay, Jack can be ordained, take care of it. So I was ordained in the living room of Kay and Rankin Griesinger's house that afternoon. And I'm being ordained, I'm still not quite certain what is it to be a minister, but I knew I wanted to be one. Well, in 85, when I brought these drawings out to show JR, I was telling him about this dream I'd had right before I came out there. He says, oh, you just got another initiation. So again, he turned to Edgar, hey, why don't you do this initiation with Jack while he's out here at a conference? And John was going to do the initiation Sunday between the ministers' meeting and the initiates' meeting. And we went upstairs to the hotel. John forgot the key to the room. He couldn't find the key. So I had another initiation level in the hallway at the Sheraton Hotel. So again, things were a little more casual, at that time than what they are now. And that was what I was accustomed to. I would see JR and say, JR, I'd like such and such, or can I do such and such? And it was right there. His decisions immediately. So that was the start of my relationship with him. So when I brought the drawings out in 85, showed him what I was doing, what we was building there in Texas. And he said, well, we don't have a piece of property yet. We don't have any land. And I said, well, we can make up a site. and just adapt the drawings to the site. And then if you ever get a site, we can adapt those to the real site. So okay, let's go for it. And at the time, I was going to use those drawings to finish my Master's of Architecture at the University of New Mexico. So I thought I was going to go from South Texas, go out to Santa Fe, use this, get my Master's. You know, JR had the set of drawings. You know, I had no intention of moving to California at all, you know, because only crazy people lived in California. And I remember saying to myself, there is no way I would drive an hour or two every day in that traffic in LA to go to work. There's no way I was going to live at Los Angeles. You know, that was a strange place to me at that time. Well, many times I got to eat my words. And so in the fall, no, it was in April 1986, they had purchased Windermere. And they had looked and looked all over the place. It was actually April Fool's Day, 1986, that JR bought Windermere. And he purchased from this neat little old lady named Marion Graywall. And when I moved up to Windermere, which was in the February 1987, I went to meet Marion. And the delightful little lady had been born in Russia, had lived through the revolution, actually went to China, you know, from Russia to get away from the Bolshevik revolution, moved to San Francisco from China, and she met a man by the name of Rishi Graywall. And Rishi was a compadre with Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru over in India when they were going, you know, trying to get independent from Britain. And when they got out of prison, Rishi came over to the U.S. to try to help establish some markets for Indian goods in the U.S. He's also wanting to start an ashram. So Rishi was looking around, happened to see this place in Santa Barbara. It came up from sale. It had been an original homestead by the Workman family from the 1800s. And the Workman grandson was living in Montecito at the time, didn't want anything to do with the ranch. So it went up for sale. Rishi bought this to build an ashram. And he had students from different places in the world, and they built houses here on what we came to name Windermere. And so his students built these 6 houses, and Rishi built one for himself. And one of Rishi's unique features is he was very hands-on, and he loved dynamite. So he was making these roads up there through the rocks and through the, you know, mountains there on Windermere. And he had this old Lincoln Continental, I was told. So Rishi would also build little structures out of the caves, the natural caves that was up there at Windermere. And he'd just take concrete block and fill in part of the cave and use one for a doghouse, use one for some storage facilities. And they built their house in the rocks in one of the highest places there at Windermere. And lo and behold, you know, Marion was cooking some fish one evening. The skillet popped, caught the curtains on fire, the house burnt down. So Rishi gets more dynamite, blows this one little rock out, creates a path in the road down to what we now call the bunkhouse. And they built the second house, beautiful view, you know, looking down on Santa Barbara and Goleta and the Channel Islands. But Rishi, again, he took his dynamite, blew off the side of this rock, hauled it out in his Lincoln Continental. You know, very creative guy, very, very much hands-on. Well, at this point, Nehru had become the leader of India because Mahatma Gandhi had been assassinated. And Mrs. Nehru asked Marion Graywall, would she please help establish even more markets for goods from India to help them start an economy? And so Marion started a little company here in Los Angeles to sell products, you know, fabrics, brass stuff, products from India. And then she'd make them into scarves, she'd make them into clothes, everything to help, you know, the economy there in India and help people in India get started. And so she's going back and forth, you know, from Windermere to LA every week, this little factory she had going. And mainly Rishi was up there with the students. They had, again, they built 6 houses up there as this ashram. And one of the main features of Windermere was this spring that came out in the very bottom corner of the property. They did not have a well. This was a source of water. This was a source of everything. And they had this little pump down in the spring, came all the way up, had a little storage tank. And so that spring was the essence of living there for quite a while. Then Reishi realized that they could make some ponds and some lakes to store lake water up there. So we got some permits. It's a couple of only permits for those mountains up there to have a dam and store water. And so that's where we get the near ponds, the far ponds, that would fill up during the rain season. During the droughts, they were dry. And we got an idea to build some ponds up in what we now call the Island Pond. So Reishi got state licenses to have dams to build ponds, what we call the near pond, the far pond, and down the south part of the property, the south pond. And the idea was to store water. It was used for firefighting if ever needed. It was also used, they needed it for their food, for their gardens. Now, Reishi passed away in the early 60s. And so Marion was up there on her own, and she had some people that rented out these houses, because there's only one house that's still left by one of the original people from one of the followers from Reishi. It's over above the barns where George Pace lives now. But everybody else had kind of gone on their way, and people were renting these little houses, and Marion was up there. Marion decided that she was going to sell the property. And this was in 1986. Well, actually, I think it was in late 1985. And she decided she's going to subdivide it and sell it, in small parcels, 5, 10 acres, because the land around her had been subdivided back, in the early 60s. And 5 acres, 10-acre parcels. And her parcel was 140 acres. Well, she went down to the county planning department. And I'm going to have to bring a little bit back. Marion liked cats. And Marion had a lot of cats in the house. So Marion had a certain fragrance about her from all these cats. And when she went down the county planning department, nobody really wanted to get too close to Marion. And a lady by the name of Susan Ward befriended her. She's working for the county. She said, well, let me find out some information for you. Can your land be subdivided and sold in parcels? And Susan looked up, the zoning codes at that time, and they had been changed a lot. And this Ag 140, had been set up, so Marion really couldn't divide her land in to smaller parcels at that time. Susan Ward happened to have been involved in an insight seminar with Terry Tillman. And she heard that that MSIA was looking for a piece of property to build a living center or retreat center on it. She got a hold of Terry Tillman and says, by the way, there's this lady has this 140 acres up in Santa Barbara. You might want to look at it. It might be a neat place for this retreat center. So Terry mentioned to JR and Edgar and Wesley, and they all drove up to Santa Barbara. And JR one time told me, he said that Marion almost ran them ragged. Because here's this little 90-year-old lady going all over, walking all over the ranch, and the guys were following. Oh, we got to see this. Well, you got to see this. Oh, we have to go over here. They couldn't keep up with her. But they so fell in love with the land, they made her an offer. And part of that offer is she could stay on the land as long as she wanted. And she accepted it. So she stayed there at the bunkhouse. And when I moved up in 86, Marion was living there. There were some renters living on the property. And when I met her, she's such a delightful little lady. She's only about 5'1", and she lived in the bunkhouse. And there's this little road that comes around the rocks up by the garden house and out. And I happened to be walking on the road one day, and here comes a car. And I see nobody driving the car. It really kind of freaked me out. And I had to look really, really close. Well, Marion's head was between the top of the steering wheel and the dash. And that's how she drove, looking out through there. It kind of got me by surprise for a little bit. But she is very independent. Here she was, 90 years old, still driving, living on her own. And I'd meet with her, about once every 2 weeks or so over to her house. Then we got more into the process of what would it take to develop Windermere into a retreat center? Okay, so we were starting with JR, Randy Garver, and myself. We're looking at what would it take to develop Windermere into a retreat center, and what would the county allow? Because Santa Barbara County had gotten to a point of zero growth. They really didn't want any large developments up there. They wanted to stay as a small community. So we had a meeting with Noel Langle, and Michael Fader and Randy Garver and JR and myself met with Noel and a couple other people from the county. And Noel Langle was the zoning administrator for the county of Santa Barbara, also a friend of Susan Ward's, and she'd set this meeting up for us. And we're just going over some basic ideals of what we'd like to do up there. And Noel said, well, how many people would you like to have at these events? And I remember saying, now, Noel, I want you to watch me. I'm pulling it out of the air. This is just a number pulling out of the air. What if we had events for 500 people up there? And he said, oh my gosh, they'd be complaining all the way down to Ventura. I said, so there's no way you could have that many people in an event up in the mountains. I said, okay, what could we have? What can we work with? What would the county accept? And it's going maybe 50, maybe 60 people at the most. But that we needed to do an environmental impact report, traffic studies, air quality, water, noise, and present this EIR report. So we started doing a dual thing at that time. Say we, JR, Randy, myself, Michael Fader was very much involved in it. We wanted to find out what did land have? What could it offer? What could it support? So one of the first things we did was to drill some water wells. We drilled 5 wells on there. The reason being is at this point, in the late 80s, we were into a 5-year drought in California. So the spring flow was getting lower and lower. And that was our only source of water for Windermere. And so we decided we need to do some water wells to provide us with a more steady supply of water. And JR's coming said, well, let's spread the wells out so if, sometime we ever divide this land up, then there'd be a well for each of the parcels. And so we spread the wells to different property, got production from 40 gallons a minute up to almost 200 gallons a minute for one well, which was really, really unique in that area. So we knew that about the property. Then in 1989, one of our donors, Steve Shepard, decided that, gosh, Windermere is a ranch, you should have a horse up there. And so he brought up this Arabian mare named Princess. Cute little Arabian mare. I looked at her and I thought, oh my gosh, should I carry her up and down the hills? Because there's no way she's going to carry me. And so I decided I needed a bigger horse to go up and down the hills because I felt guilty getting on Princess. I found a standard-bred mare, and Chuck Kruger and Dorothy had moved up also to work at Windermere at this time. They bought 2 Arabian horses. So we went from 1 horse to 4 horses in about 3 weeks' time. And all of a sudden, we became a ranch, a horse ranch. And, JR thoroughly enjoyed riding horses. It was also a really neat way of seeing the property and getting from point A to point B and seeing things we hadn't seen before. And we also noticed that there was sort of a change just in the general energy at Windermere when we started bringing horses in. Well, another donor named Taylor Monroe decided that we needed some more horses. Taylor donated 18 Egyptian Arabian horses to Windermere. And out of that 18, 6 of them were pregnant mares. And I went, we'd better learn about foaling some horses real quick. So all of a sudden, Connemara, who would come up to work with the horses, Chuck, myself, we got immersed in horses. And I read an article in the Arabian Horse World about this ranch down in Waco, Texas called Gardner Bloodstock, and some lady had a horse there and talking about the horse is worth about $300,000. So I called JR and I said, hey, there's a lady who's got this Egyptian Arabian horse valued about $300,000. He said, well, what are our horses worth? I said, gee, I have no idea. And in his usual way, he said, well, that's not a very good answer. Go find out. So I went to Waco, Texas, and I spent a week down on the Gardner Bloodstock. And come to find out, this is where these horses had been before they were donated to us. So the people there at Gardner Bloodstock knew the horses, very familiar with them. Turns out one of the mares we were donated was worth about $250,000. And they were talking the uniqueness of Egyptian Arabian horses and how few there are in the United States. Well, at this point, we had 18, gave us almost 1% of the Egyptian Arabian horses in the United States at that time, because there are so few straight Egyptian Arabian horses. Well, then we got into learning about foaling. Started studying some stuff with Dr. Miller, who's a vet, and talking, about how do you interact with the foal when they're very, very young. So when you work with them later on, it's easier to work with the horses. So we learned about imprinting, which is what he called this process. And we had gotten radios, these walkie-talkie radios. And Phil Danza had come up, and Greg Fritz had come up. They had set an antenna on the highest part of the property called Top Rock, so that we could use these radios to talk to one another in town. Well, JR says, I won't be able to talk to you. So they set up an antenna, so that Mandeville, where JR lives, could talk. Well, then they set up another antenna so that you could talk over the 2101 building. So with these radios, we could talk to everybody involved, in Mandeville and at 2101 if they had a radio. And as one of these foals would be arriving, usually 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd get on the radio to JR. Just described, the foal, what their color was, what their gender was, what they were like. And I wasn't realizing that there were people at Prana who I guess were trying to sleep, that all of a sudden were interrupted with this broadcast of another foal being arrived and all the descriptions of it. So many people got to know about our horses and our foals. And watching JR work with the horses was amazing. And I remember that JR and Jesus came up one day, and Zeus gave me this article about a guy. And the guy was riding a horse with no saddle and no bridle. And I remember telling JR, says, I don't know how to do that, but I want to learn. Well, lo and behold, a few months later, I went to this presentation out in Santa Ynez by Pat Pirelli. And he was talking about working with horses and developing a communication system with the horses. And I got to looking at Pat, and I remembered what Zeus had shown me. It was the same guy. And in this presentation, Pat was showing a video, and Pat was riding a horse that had no saddle, no bridle. He was jumping fences on this thing. He was doing a sliding stop on this horse. He was changing leads on this horse. I was really impressed with this guy. But I thought, but this is Pat, he's a professional. He showed us a second video of everyday people working with their horses. And he said, you're going to notice this one lady in this video. When she first came, she is so frightened of horses she could not get out of the car. He says, you're going to notice what she does with her horse after going to some of these workshops. And I noticed the lady had a horse lay down, and this is an older lady, wasn't young, spry. Had the horse lay down. She got on this horse backwards and asked this horse to stand up. She rode this horse while she was heading backwards. And I thought, if the everyday person can do this, I want to work with this person. And so one of the Egyptian Arabians we had was named Prince. And I asked JR, I said, can I take Prince to some workshops of Pat Pirelli? He said, sure, go for it. And we was fortunate, Pat was still doing these workshops in person. He's going around the country doing them. We went down to the Earl Warren Arena in Santa Barbara. And Prince and I went through these workshops with Pat Pirelli. And one of the aspects on it was just riding a horse bareback using just a cotton lead rope and a halter. And I thought, I want to learn how to do this with no saddle and no bridle. And Prince was so great, so loving, so willing. There's one point I just reached up and I took the halter off of him. He's riding around this arena, it's like a dance with the two of us. And so part of where this is going is JR always gave me the freedom and encouraged me to try things, to go for things, to learn things. And that's kind of how I view Windermere. It's this place where you can go. You can try things. You can learn things. You can experience things that you don't do in everyday world in the city and in Los Angeles. And the other thing in these writings, JR and Zeus would come up and we'd go for a ride. And I would say, JR, I just saw this one place, or I saw this trail. He says, well, let's go. We'd get on a horse and here we'd take off. And I remember this one trail comes straight up the side of this ravine. There's this low branch as you get up to the top. And I had only walked it. I hadn't ridden a horse up through there. And JR said, well, let's go. And I realized JR had no fear. He would just go for it. Well, he went, Zeus went, I went, off we'd go. And part of the lesson also up there was no fear. Go for it. Try it. Check it out. It's part of JR that stays with me is to go for it. If you can think of it, try it out. And I think that was part of what was offered to a lot of people at Windermere, because folks started coming up from Los Angeles and other places and visiting, and they wanted to be there when JR was there, and we'd go for rides. And these weren't your everyday ride around the park rides. There'd be times we would ride down to the lower portion of the property where this spring was located. And the horse I bought was a standard bred mare, and I didn't know at the time, but she was raised as a trotter. And in trotting, they go around the track to get everybody lined up, and as soon as they turn around, the race is on. Well, Zeus and I would be down there at this lower part of the property, and as soon as I would turn my horse around, off she'd go at this race trot. Well, Zeus, he and Blue would want to join in. Well, JR would join in, so all of a sudden we're racing up the old Stagecoach Trail. It was neat. It was a neat experience. And people who weren't quite used to that, had gone on a ride with us, were sometimes shocked, but they stretched, they tried. And I remember when Benji's son came over from Israel and went on a ride with us. And it happened, he fell off a princess, and JR said, hey, don't accept that. Get back on, let's go again. And that's one of the other things I was learning from JR is, okay, so you make a mistake. You fall off the horse. You have something that you didn't work out the way you wanted. Don't accept that as the final solution. You get back up and you keep going. And for me, that is, again, one of the essences of Windermere, because we were learning about this land. We were learning about Santa Barbara. What would they accept? What would the neighbors accept? And we heard this definition that in Santa Barbara, a conservationist is somebody who has about a 3 to 5 acre parcel with a little house on it, maybe 3-bedroom house. And that the definition of a developer is somebody from Los Angeles that wants to come up and buy about 3 to 5 acres and build a little 3-bedroom house. So we learned that once people are up there, they don't want anybody else coming up there. So we were having to deal with a neighborhood of people who had these little ranchettes around Windermere that didn't want any development in their area. And I remember telling JR that at the time that we can develop this land and the neighbors can have their reactions, but we have no against us in us, then we'll be proving and living, the Institute for Individual and World Peace. And I said, it may take us a while, but I think that's part of the process that we're doing up here, is learning to meet these people, learning to listen to them, learning to interact with them, and that at some point we'll go to the county and they'll be in favor of us because we have been good neighbors. And it's still an ongoing process. With the neighbors around Windermere, everybody that you meet, it's a lifelong process. And this is one of the things I would see with JR. It's just accepting people as they were. Now, I'd kind of like people to be the way I'd like them to be. But he just accepted people as they were, and we would go from there. And so watching him do that, I watched him do it with people. I watched him do it with horses. And I mentioned to him one day, I says, you know, I think that some of the best lessons I'm learning about being a human comes from watching the horses and their interactions. Because our horses ran as a herd. Down there, they had 140 acres, you know, to roam on. And we had the young foals, and we had the mares, we had the geldings, and people kept donating horses to us. So we finally got up to where we had 48 horses there at Windermere. And they ranged from a little stallion who was a little Morgan stallion, chocolate palomino, beautiful color, all the way up to Charlie, you know, who had pulled the trolley on the main street of Disney. You know, a big draft horse, very loving, very kind. We had 2 Clydesdales, Ben and Kenora. You know, so we went from very small horses up to full-size draft horses. And I'll back up a little bit with those Clydesdales. Randy Garver had arranged someone to donate these 2 Clydesdales to us. And he had them in his place down in Ojai. And Randy called me one day. He said, how's the weather? How's everything? Can I bring the horses up? The 2 Clydesdales. He said, well, Randy, there's a little fire that's in the dump there in the county, but everything else looks fine. I said, I'm up here at the mountain. I'm looking down. It looks fine. He said, okay, I'm going to head out. And JR and Zeus had come up, you know, because they wanted to be there when these Clydesdales arrived. And I had driven down to town. There's some errands I needed to run. I was going to buy some hamburgers to bring back up to the ranch just to have for everybody, you know, waiting on the horses to arrive. And as I went to get the hamburgers, I turned and went up Highway 154, and there's a roadblock there. Highway patrolman says, you cannot go, there's a fire up on 154. And I said, well, I've got to go. There's people, there's horses. I've got to get up there. He said, you can't do it. I said, you know, I said, well, what if you just kind of turn your back a little bit and let me head up there? He says, you're on your own. So I'm going up around the curve, 154, and I happen to meet some firefighters from the hot shot crew. They said, hey, don't go. You can't get through it. Okay, so I turned around. You know, I called Jay on the radio, said, I'm stuck down here. I can't get through 154. And just a few minutes later, he calls me back and said, hey, if you want to get up here, come up the old road out of Montecito, you know, up to East Camino Cielo and up that way. And John had just come up that direction. You know, John Morton had come up from LA. So I took off, went up the back roads. You know, I could see the fires off to the side of me. You know, you're on there in the hills of Santa Barbara. I get up to Windermere, and we could hear the fires below us, but we couldn't quite see what it was doing. And JR and Zeus and I were standing out at this one point, you know, called Qualeen, which is just a rock outcropping. And again, we could see the fires below us. We could hear it, but we couldn't tell how close it was to us. And one of the first things that happened when that fire started, they turned off all the electrical power on that part of the mountain. So we all went over to Mira Cielo, which was a house that JR had over on East Camino Cielo. We was going to, you know, get together there, have some food. It was getting dark. There's no power. So we're reaching into the refrigerator, bringing out different items of food, and you had no idea what you was eating till you took a bite. You know, it was kind of like this camp out in the dark. And even though it was serious because of the fire, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was fun. You know, we were camping out at Miracel with JR, John, Zeus. The next morning, you can drive up East Camino, and there's one position where you can kind of see down on 154 and see what was coming off, how close was the fire to us. And we'd take turns going to that position and back to Miracelo. And it looked like the fire was staying away from us. It seemed like we were okay. And I came back down to the house, and in the dining room there at Miracelo, there's this big picture window that looks out towards the ocean. And I saw the fire jump 154 and start coming up the hill. and there's a tree there, full-size tree, that instantly went into flames. And everybody else was downstairs sleeping because we'd been up most of the night. And JR just looked at me and says, if you was asleep, would you want to be woken up at this point? I says, yeah. He says, me too. So we woke up everybody. And gosh, Kathy Lambert was there, I forgot Rosie's last name last night. Rosie Vonsi, excuse me. Rosie Vonsi was there, Chuck was there, Dorothy was there, Ted was there, Zeus, John, JR was all there. We decided we was going to go the back roads to Solvang. And we're trying to get things in the car, get ready to go. And Zeus locked the keys to the link in the trunk of the car. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? And in the midst of this, we're trying to figure out how to open up the trunk, how to get the car started. I called Jim Matson, who's a mechanic down in Los Angeles. I said, Jim, is there any way we could hotwire this car to get it started, get us out of here? No, unfortunately, it was designed not to do that. And I climbed up on the roof of Miracel, and I was watching. I had a radio, and I was listening to the fire department. And the fire department said they had run out of this fire retardant, and the planes were having to go back, to Air Force Base to get more. I went, oh my, we're going to really have fun. We're trying to figure out how to get the car started. They ran out of retardant, and the fire's coming up the hill in our general direction. And it's no more than maybe a minute later, I felt the wind change. The wind started blowing towards the ocean. It started blowing the fire away from us. And it wasn't until later that JR told me, he says, Zeus was the only one that had the presence of mind to call in the light in the midst of all of this. So I'm figuring that light reversed the wind for us. And a little bit later, I told Zeus, I says, you're going to hear about this in the seminar. I said, I don't know when, but somewhere in the seminar, JR's going to comment about how you locked the keys in the trunk. And I said, it'll probably be kind of funny at the time too. And in all of this, JR's calm was something that I remember. It didn't impact him. He didn't get upset, that the keys were locked in the trunk. He didn't get upset that the fire was coming towards us. There's this calm this whole time. And I think it just kind of flowed out from him to the rest of us. Like, it's going to be okay. And so some of the memories I remember from the 1990 fires, they called it the Painted Cave Fire, was that night. No lights. We don't know what we're eating until you take a bite of it. And what fun that was. That sense of just camping out, a sense of, excitement and discovery. And JR's calm through the process. And there was some reports afterwards that there really wasn't any body of water up on the mountains for the fire departments to use to help put the fire out. And so remembering that Reishi had built the near pond and the fire pond, we started building what we now call the island pond, so that there would be a source of water up there that if this was ever occur again, that would be easily accessible to fire departments, easily accessible to somebody there in Windermere. And so we built kind of like these 3 stair-step ponds up there. And the ideal being is that there would be a reserve of water if it was ever needed. And now the neighbors, thought we were trying to drain their wells. And I was trying to explain to them that this was for the benefit of everybody. That one of the things I had heard in the process is there was no water up there, for the firefighters to use to help protect us. I said, so that's what this is about. And it was a process also, just before the Painted Cave Fire, Ted and I had been clearing a lot of the brush out that was around the houses at Windermere. And we were doing the chainsaws. And Chuck was doing part of it, Ted was doing part of it, I was doing part of it. And I remember the neighbors were complaining that we were destroying the mountain. We were really messing things up. And I tried to explain to them we were trying to create some safe zones in case of a wildfire. The weekend after that Painted Cave fire, all you heard in that neighborhood was chainsaws. People were creating safe zones around their houses. And several neighbors came up to me and apologized, says, I was so wrong. Now I understand what you were doing and why you were doing it, and that they were now doing it, to help protect themselves. And so slowly we were interacting with the neighbors. We were getting to know one another, and they come to just accept us as everyday people, just from the process of living, just from the process of experiencing things. And one of the things that we did is there's a little community that's down off of the old Stagecoach Road, and they had no power for water. And we had a portable generator there at Windermere. And so we allowed them to use that generator to pump water to supply their community. And it was just kind of nice that it was there, it was available, and we could share it. And so there's a lot of memories I have, from the fire of 1990. And I date things, in my mind from that date because it stands out in my memory. Also with the horses, there was a perceptible change, at least for me, on the land with the horses there. And we did some thing called HAT trainings, which was horse awareness trainings. We'd just do some little things with people when they'd come up there at the ranch. And there were so many people that I observed who were fearful of horses and afraid to approach them. And we'd just kind of have them sit on the horse, and we'd lead them around a little bit, have them rub them, touch them. And there's this one lady who had tears in her eyes. She said, something just changed in me. And we had some of the young foals, and these foals want to lay down and take a nap. And there's this one woman from, I believe, Michigan, who I think she had multiple sclerosis and was using the canes to walk. I looked over, and she was laying down with these foals in the corral. And I just thought, how nice. Just how wonderful for her to have that experience with these horses. And I saw it over and over. And Charlie, and this big Belgian draft horse. I looked out in the meadow one day, and Lee Taylor Young was out there, and she's just hugging Charlie's neck. I just looked, and this went on for a pretty good while. And Lee came walking up, and she said, I don't know what happened, but something lifted inside of me. She says, I can't quite describe it, I can just tell you it happened. And I got to looking, and I got to thinking about all the interactions people have with the horses. And I mentioned to JR one day, I said, I think horses can transmute human emotions. He says, yeah, they can. And I said, wow, And when we had these horses, there were so many people telling us, well, you should do this. You should feed them that. You should do this with the horses. I said, one day, I mentioned to JR, I said, I wanted to ask the horse, well, what do you want? What would you like? And I said, I don't know how to communicate with them, but I'd like to find out. And again, it's probably a month or so later, JR and Zeus came up, and Zeus gave me this article about a lady who's an animal communicator. Her name was Carol Gurney. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. There are people who can communicate with animals. And it had to be 3 or 4 years later. I happened to be at the big horse show in Los Angeles County Fair in February called the Equine Fair. And here's this lady by the name of Carol Gurney doing a little demonstration and communicating with horses. I thought she was really nice, very pleasant lady, and I followed her over to her booth. She had a book about communicating with horses, and I opened it up, and the foreword of the book was written by Lee Taylor Young. And she was sharing her experience with Charlie up at Windermere in the foreword of this book. I thought, this is the person that Zeus gave me this article about. And I thought, what a coincidence. And I asked her, I said, do you do classes? She says, yeah. I said, I want to take some. I said, I would like to know directly from the horses, what would they like? What did they need? And I just kept thinking, all these different times I'd make some comment to JR, I'd like to do something. And within a short time, he and Zeus would be giving me an article about it. Here's this person doing it. Here's this person doing it. And just like, he's always opened up these avenues for me. And providing me with some things where I thought I was stuck. And he go, here's somebody doing this. And that was one of the things, again, I thought about JR, about being the way shower. He was open to anything and everything. And his interests covered everything. He didn't put something down. He didn't close off from it. And I'd mention something, and lo and behold, here him and Zeus a month later give me an article about it. And that, again, I keep going back to Windermere, but for me, this is part of Windermere. There's all these opportunities there to try something, to check it out, to see how does it work.
Can you talk about what you see Windermere based on you being with JR and John? How do you see Windermere now after JR's passing? Take it like that.
Okay, I'm gonna lead up to it. One of the things, when I'm here in Los Angeles, I literally feel the city kind of pushing on me. And I can go up to Windermere and just walk around a little bit. And I will literally feel that drain out of me. And it took me a while to get aware of it. And now I know it's there, I know it happens. And I keep thinking, what an opportunity for people to go up there and get away from the city, get away from their everyday life. And there's something about Windermere and the energies and just what it is, it drains that away. And you get a different perspective. It's almost like a stress relief. It's right there. It's an hour away from Los Angeles. And for me, Windermere was a place of discovery, is a place of wonderment, a place of trying something new. And so I see that as an offering that Windermere has for people. It's not city streets, it's not pavement. There's trees, there's rocks, there's difference in elevations, there's a spring, there's a little subtropical area down there. There's places to go walking, to go discover, to go see, to go touch, to go find something new for yourself. And that's one of the things I really thoroughly enjoyed about Windermere. I would go find some new place, some new rock setting, some new trees. I'd be telling JR about it. Or in the spring, these little wildflowers would come up. And they're not like a garden that you see in the city with this profuse amount of flowers. So you have to learn to look. You have to learn to see what's there and the changes that are there. And again, it slows you down. It offers you a little more time for perspective, for looking inward, and for noticing things. And one of the first times I went up to Windermere, this would be early 1987. I was just walking around. I didn't know anything about Windermere. I'd just go walking. There's one part over here with this rock outcropping, and JR named it Qualeen. And I told JR, I says, I don't know what there is about this spot. But I said, I'd be in meetings with the county, and I couldn't feel myself uptight. And I'd come up here, and I'd sit on this rock. You're looking off at Santa Barbara, Goleta, and the Channel Islands. I said, JR, I would soon find myself physically smiling. Like, whatever the tensions, things were gone. It's like something happened. I said, and this has occurred on more than one occasion. At the time, he just turned to Lex Bixby and says, we should build a healing center here. And a lot of times when visitors would come up, I would take them over to the Qualeen. I said, just sit here on the rocks for a little bit. Just experience it. And there are energy centers all over Windermere. But it's the kind of thing that you have to go there, you have to experience it for yourself. Yeah, I can describe it, I can tell you about it, but when you go there and just allow yourself, open yourself up and allow yourself, there are energy centers there to help heal you, to help remove the stress from you, to help bring up that childhood sense of discovery and wonder. And I would love to feed the herd down in what we call the South Orchard, especially in wintertime. And the clouds are coming in off the ocean. And then you got this cloud cover overhead. I'd be feeding the herd, and once the herd kind of got into position to where they wanted to eat, there's this peace, this literally perceptible sense of peace would come in. And as the sun would start to set, it would just change all the bottom of the clouds, the pastels. It was like this living watercolor that was in 3D. And then the little lights would come on in Santa Barbara and Galitas like little jewels down there below. And I'd just stand there in a total sense of awe and wonderment. This is also what I think Windermere provides for us. There's water there. We can grow food there. We can have people come up. And we're going to have to work with the county. And how would they allow us to have a group of people up there where they're comfortable with it? You know, that part we're going to have to work with and still come up with the solution. I think the neighbors are more accommodating now. They're less, fearful of some big project. I think they'll be more willing to have something and more willing to work with us on that. One of the things that I notice up there, the soil has minerals in it because it used to be on the bottom of the ocean. If you add a little bit of humus with it, you can grow almost anything. And the climate actually changes from the top of the property to the lower part of the property. So you could have different things that you're raising based on almost a different climate on the same piece of land. We have the water from the wells up there to provide for the growing of things. And in the growing of it, we're providing green cover, providing oxygen, but we're also providing a fire break. And in this last fire that came through, the Santa Barbara and the hills, it hit Windermere, and because Windermere had been cleared of some of the brush, the fire stopped. And the fire department even used it as a staging area for the mountainside because they deemed it safe to have their equipment there. And so in having these crops there, one, we're providing food for people. We're providing them something to come do because people always want to come to Windermere and say, what can I do? God, I'd like to come do something up there. So we're offering them some opportunities of things to do, things to grow, fresh food to eat, and it provides a fire break for that whole neighborhood up there. And the biggest thing I'll keep coming back to is this sense of discovery that we offer. That someone can come up there and find their spot, their place, their rock, their tree that's special to them. And it's in the process of discovery, things are going to open up for them. We just need to provide the way to bring them up there, to have them there. And this is one of the things that Jay always was doing, was inviting people up. Come up, experience the land. Yeah, I've heard him, I don't know how many occasions, invite people up to come experience the land. And I think that's what we could do now. And maybe we build one house up there that can house 10 people, 12 people, and have them come up. Because once they experience it, they're going to share that experience with other people and say, wow, this is what I discovered. And I think it will grow from there. And I don't have a limit in me as to what Windermere can do, what it can offer. I have walked almost all of that land. and have found so many spots, and they're unique, they're different, that I think there's a spot for everybody up there they can connect to, and it'd be very special to them. And I remember JR saying, take like a rock or something with you when you've had an experience like that. You take a little memento and you have it in your pocket. You just reach in there and touch it, and it will bring that memory back to you. So we can revive these memories to thousands of people from all over the world. And I remember that David Morton brought 2 doctors from Russia to visit Windermere. And I took them down, when we was feeding the herd. And they've never really been around horses. And I was introducing them to different members of the herd. And I asked them if they wanted to settle on prints. They transformed into young kids again. They were smiling, they were laughing. I don't speak Russian, but I could understand the body language, the excitement, the laughter, and just leading them around on prints. And I looked around, and the horse had formed a circle around us. I was just kind of amazed, of the horse's perception. But to watch this experience with these 2 doctors from Russia, and to have them touch into that childlike quality inside of them was very, very special. And that occurred over and over and over up there. And so I think that's one of the things we can offer people. The other part, it'd be a little bit more involved, but we live in a semi-arid environment. We have drought, we have floods. We have drought, we have floods. We could develop and design some plants up there. We could develop the land some to kind of hold the water a little bit so it doesn't flood so much. We could be doing things that could show other people some options. One of the things that I got into in reading a little bit was sustainability. Guys over in Australia started doing this. And when I was reading that, I thought, wow, this is the first thing I see that we can offer Windermere. And the ideal was retaining some of the rainwater so it would percolate in, instead of just letting it run off down to the ocean. And it was, planting some trees and stuff to help with the water, to help with the rain. Because I thought Windermere offers so much to us with these pockets of energy, with these experiences of being out in the open, that this is something we could offer back to the land. Is looking about how does the water flow in the rains? How do we slow it down? How do we retain some of it? Because we have some natural drainage areas there that we could work with. And
I've talked to some experts, and they say that water is gold, and we have 6 wells, right?
Yeah.
Windermere water. What do you know?
And we have the spring. That spring was some of the best water. And when we were first went up there, the county says, well, you have to have that tested, if you're going to use that for drinking water. So we had it tested. It was great water. And with the wells, there's 6 wells up there. Like I said, I think the least producing one is like 20 gallons a minute. Most of them around 40 gallons a minute, and the one down the middle part of the property is almost 200 gallons a minute. One of the visuals I have, we hooked an 1.5 inch fire hose to that well, and it has a 40 horsepower pump in it. We stretched this hose out, and I asked Ted Drake to hold the end of that hose. Well, Ted Drake might weigh 110 or 115 pounds. I wasn't thinking about it at the time. Here's Ted holding in that hose, and I turn that well on with that 40 horsepower motor. 200 gallons starts coming out of that, and I mean, Ted is moving all over trying to hang on that hose, and I shouldn't laugh, but it was funny watching. I immediately had to turn it off, but we produced that much water out of that well. That's a lot of water. One of the things I did while I was up there is I put some solar panels outside the barn. There's there's a couple of solar panels, and they run lights in these little bathrooms that's outside the barn. There's some batteries, that stores the power. So we have sun up there. We could be using solar. We have wind up there. We could be using wind power with that. We could be using solar. Again, it'd be almost like a research center. That little things that we could do that's residential size. You don't have to have the great big, $2 million wind turbine. You could have some smaller wind turbines that people could utilize for their homes. And we could be leading the way. One of the other things is there, when we was talking about developing the land, they said that we had to be able to handle all of the sewage with a septic tank and a leach field. Well, for a leach field to work properly, you need 4 feet depth of soil. And the bacteria, eat up all of the bacteria that's coming from your effluent water. There's not many places on Windermere that has a depth of soil of 4 feet. And so I learned about dry wells. And basically, you're just drilling this 3-foot diameter hole into the ground. You're putting a perforated pipe in the center of it, and you backfill it with gravel. And the water leaches out into the soil. I thought, well, where does that water go? Are we going to be drinking it a little bit later? So Ted Adams is a plumber that I met up there. And a friend of his had what's called an aerobic septic tank. And it puts air into the septic tank, and it breaks the solids down. And what comes out is gray water quality. In other words, you can use it for irrigating. You can put it on your yard. You can use it on your crops. And both Murciello and Windermere have the 2 approved aerobic septic tanks in Santa Barbara County. Again, we could be a leader, a demonstration of things that can be done. And there's so much opportunities with all of that. Water management, water flow, it's endless possibilities in my mind. The new people that won't have the opportunity to come into Windermere and share time with JR. Windermere is a place of magic. It's a place of discovery. It's an opportunity to go back into your childhood almost, with this sense of discovery, with this sense of wonder, like what's around the corner, what's in the next tree, where's the next rock. And it also, I'm pretty much guarantee you, if you go up there, you will feel the stresses and the pressures of the day drain out of you. It's something that happens up there. And JR always gave me this leeway and this freedom. I'd have some ideas, try it, go for it. So I'm offering you the same thing. You're going to have some ideals and some wonder. Bring it up, talk to the presidency about it, talk to John about it, try it, go for it. Is it a way of conserving water? Is it a way of plants? Is it a way, of retaining some water so it recharges the aquifer? And, one thing with JR, it's going to sound a little, I guess, selfish, but I often thought, you had Windermere just for me. Those horses, I felt like were just for me. The learning, the experiences we had, all the things that I learned. And even in working with children now as Santa, I use techniques I learned working with the foals up there at Windermere to work with young children who are a little bit not certain of Santa, and they'll maybe a little bit afraid. And JR's just encouragement to try things, to go for it. Check it out for myself. If I made a mistake, okay, get back up in the saddle, try it again. And this sense of wonder, and he was always curious about things. Didn't matter what. There's this curiosity, and this will encourage my curiosity. And well, check it out, go for it. And I guess some of the main things with me with JR, he never judged anything. I could tell JR anything. I could share anything, doubts, wonders. there was no judgment in it. And I really liked that. And if somebody still trying to emulate myself, I got to work on it. But he just did it. And just the encouragement of the sense of wonder that he had for me, that it still walks with me. And, I was talking earlier, I've taken a couple of road trips to Texas. And I swear I can turn over there and he's sitting beside me. So I feel like he's still with me. He still encouraged me, of going for it. And that'd be my last, I guess, suggestion, folks, is you feel it, go for it. Try it. Check it out. Don't limit yourself. I remember him saying, don't say no for somebody. Let them say it. Don't say it for them inside yourself. So don't limit yourself. I think somebody may say no. And the other thing that comes up for me often, he said, don't be afraid to ask the dumb question. Because I would be sitting in some of these meetings we had, and I thought, I got it. Everybody already knows that. I don't know why I ask that question. And I'd finally get around, and I'd ask, and oh, well, we hadn't thought about that. Now, I was thinking of some dumb question. He told me, don't be afraid to ask a dumb question.
So tell Jared what you want to say.
Oh, Jared, yeah. I remember how you broke a bunch of crystals for me. I remember your sense of humor. Now, I'm going to throw in one story. There's a little trail near Cielo. It goes from the house all the way down to the pump house. And the telephone lines went down there, and this water line went down there. We used to have to walk it and walk it back up. So he said, well, let's get the guy with his bulldozer to make a trail. Maybe we could drive it. It'd be easier. And I had this little 1943 Jeep. I thought, okay, I'm going to try to drive this thing, drive this trail. And it just been freshly done. There's fresh dirt on it. Now I'm driving the little Jeep, and I'm coming to this one turn. And I'm trying to turn the Jeep, and it's not turning. I'm heading downhill, and there's this drop-off, pretty significant drop-off. I'm trying to turn, no work. I'm trying to stop the Jeep, no work. And I thought, if I jump out of here, will my legs get caught on the steering wheel? Or should I just hang on and, hope for the best? Well, fortunately, enough dirt built up in front of the Jeep, it stopped me. I was sitting there for a little while. I went, okay. Well, I was telling JR about this experience when I got back up to the house. He said, well, what did I do? I said, well, I kind of called in the light. He says, no, Jack, holy shit's not really calling in the light. And the humor, just to remind myself, that to call in the light, in the midst of it. And just the loving. I feel like JR walks with me. That's beside me. It's a gift, but I guess he's given me that my whole life.
So tell JR what you want to tell him.
So JR, thank you. Thank you for the loving. Thank you for the example. You did things without fear. You did things without judgment. You allowed me to do things without judgment. You allowed me the freedom to try things. You gave me the encouragement to try things. And I just want you to know how much I love you, how much I support you, how much I care for you, and how much I bless you for being in my life and being my personal way shower. And thank you.